My name is Billy Shebar, and my film is called Monk in Pieces. And it's about the visionary composer, performer, theater artist, filmmaker Meredith Monk, who kind of had to battle her whole life for the recognition of stodgy critics who didn't really quite understand her work for many decades. She's somebody who has, for her whole career, broken down the boundaries, the conventional boundaries between art forms, and now finally is beginning to get some recognition, well-deserved recognition, and very happy to be at the Berlinale with this film as its premiere.
I think a lot of what Meredith does, to the ear, it sounds like something that anybody could do, so it's very relatable. But it's actually harder to do than it appears. As somebody who's coming from a music background, I realized that the words are only one element, and they don't really have to take precedence. And I also realized that, yeah, you can do things without words, and it still has meaning. It still has an emotional connection.
Hi, welcome to the Teddy TV. My name is Zsombor Bobák, and this time we are talking about the film Monk in Pieces. Hi, welcome to the Teddy. Welcome to the Berlinale.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
My first question would be, do you remember when you first encountered Meredith Monk's work, and what kind of feelings did it evoke in you?
Yeah, I remember it very well because it was 1990 actually. My wife had just been selected by Meredith to perform in Atlas, which was one of her most important works in opera. And so she was coming home with this music that was just being developed for Atlas. And I thought, this is incredible. This is like nothing I have ever heard before. Because it was a kind of vocal music especially that was able to evoke emotions, very profound emotions, without using words. I think that's kind of one of Meredith's main contributions, and to experience that for the first time is kind of mind-blowing. So that was it. And then from then on, actually, Katie, who's my wife, continued to work with Meredith on every major piece that Meredith did over the years. And during that time, my love of her music just kind of deepened, and I also got to know her a bit and thought, okay, this is a really interesting, incredibly resilient, incredibly powerful, original artist who I would love to make a film about. So.
Yeah, very understandable. How did this process start, making the film, and how did you approach Meredith about the idea of this project?
I would say this started, I think a lot of when you're making documentary films and you're sort of looking for your next project, you think about, always the most important thing is having access to someone or some situation that's interesting. Right. And here I had realized suddenly, okay, I've known this person now for 30 years. I've kind of been on tour with her. And I thought, well, this could be a really interesting documentary. So I approached her. She was very open to the idea. And the one thing actually that was the most important to me is she welcomed me in a way to approach it independently. She herself is a filmmaker, and she said from the very beginning, this is your film. She wasn't going to be, even though she was, as a filmmaker, she would have a lot of ideas about how she would want it done. She really, really gave me the room to have my own interpretation of her film and her life.
Yeah, I was very curious about that actually, because I imagine that when people make films themselves and then somebody approaches them that like, oh, I would like to make a film about your work and about your life, that maybe it's not necessarily the easiest to give up control and say that, okay, like, you do you, and you have the complete freedom to approach this. But it's nice to hear that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, anybody who decides to be the subject of a documentary is taking a huge leap of faith and trust.
Absolutely.
And even with the 30 years of knowing Meredith, the relationship, I think she was, at first there was a little caution. What does she want to talk about? What does she not want to talk about? A lot of dancing around each other, kind of thing. And it happened over a period of several years. But I think in the end, she really did trust me with it, and I'm very grateful for that. Yeah.
But then in that way, it was also like a collaborative effort, wasn't it?
Well, it has to be to some degree, because she was opening up her whole archive to me, including family photos and that kind of thing. So I did want to be sure that she was comfortable with like the images from her childhood or that we were using and that kind of thing. So in that sense, yes, and also collaborative, inviting me into her loft in Tribeca, which she's been there since the 70s, and that's where she lives and works. She has a big workspace there where a lot of the rehearsals are. So for her to open that up to me and then sort of come to an agreement with me about what we could film, yes, it is necessarily collaborative. Yeah. But she was never invasive during that process or say, she understood what it takes to make a film.
Yeah, I see. You structured the film in a very interesting way, in a very peculiar way. Can you tell us a little bit about the structure of the narrative?
Yes, and that's a decision I made pretty early on, because Meredith's own work, if you see her music theater works or you see her films, she uses what she would call a mosaic approach. It's not a linear A, B, C, D story. It's a piece here, a piece here, a piece here, and then there's a magical thing that happens where it all starts to kind of add up to something bigger than the sum of the parts by the end of it. So I thought I want to really try to emulate that in the film, and it was a really great formal challenge to do it that way, because it is much harder to work within that structure and maintain, pull a sense that you're pulling a viewer through it and that people are engaged through the whole thing. So you look for interesting connections and ways to propel you from one piece to the next. But I really was very happy with it because it also allowed me to put the music front and center. Like I knew what my favorite pieces of music were, and then it was a matter of coming up with ideas that you could pair the music with visual material, and that was kind of where it went. But that's how it came from her structure. It was really about mirroring her approach to theater and film. Yeah.
So just to say that basically the structure in the film is that you choose certain songs, and then each song constitutes a sort of chapter within the film, and this is how the narrative unfolds. And for me, a question was about this way of working, that when you pick a song, which obviously you do because you have some sort of relationship with that song and you find it interesting from your own perspective, then do you pair the storylines and the visuals that come with that particular chapter within the film based on how you view that song and what it means to you? Or do you then try to figure out more what it meant when Meredith was composing those pieces and what it meant for her? In which way do you then organize the visual material around the songs?
That's a great question. I think always in the back of my head is how she intended it. But then I always, for me, the number one concern was, what's an interesting way, like what visual material and what fact about Meredith's life or her work pairs best with this song? And that was completely my own interpretation. And in fact, you put your finger on what to me was the scariest part of making this film, because I did take big liberties with how her music was being used. I was using it with visual material that she did not originally intend it that way. So that was my biggest fear when Meredith finally did see the film, which I showed it to her after it was finished. I wanted her to see it before it premiered here. And my biggest fear was that, because how open she would be to that. And that was the most wonderful thing, which was that she actually really loved
Yeah.
these things. She said, I would never, think of putting this with that, but it works and it's great. And that's really a testament to how open she is, So.
Yeah, but I think that also nicely ties in with one of the key subject matters of the film, and which is, facing the end, kind of facing mortality, and then what happens with this very unique body of work when Meredith will not be there anymore. And I think this is also then kind of a confrontation with that, when you then take this body of work and make something out of it. So I'm curious to hear a bit more about this dynamic that was going on while you were making the film.
That's so interesting. This is the first time I'm thinking of that. My head was always in the film, looking at moments like there's that wonderful moment where there's for the first time she hands off the production of Atlas to another director and another young woman who's doing the role that she herself did in 1990, and you feel that like it's a little hard for her to let go, but it is, the whole exercise is about how is her work going to go on when she's gone, and the thing is, her work is so singular. Everything she's ever done was she directed it, she performed in it, she choreographed it. So to suddenly say, oh, someone else can do this is a very complicated and fraught, kind of thing. But you raising that for the first time, I hadn't really thought about my film in that context, but it very much is. This is another case of someone else is taking your material and putting their own interpretation on it, and creating something that will hopefully, live on, have a life after you're gone as a record, And I think she does see it that way,
That was just very exciting to think about while watching the material. Visually as well, the film is quite striking. It's a very rich tapestry of different kinds of material that come together. Can you guide us through the visual language that you created in the film?
Yeah. So you're right, it's a mix of some of the films that Meredith made starting in the 60s and 70s. There's also performance videos that were filmed by a lot of the archival material is actually from Germany, because German TV and German filmmakers were interested in Meredith, before a lot of other people. I mean, Meredith has a wonderful history here. That's a whole separate thing that we can talk about. But there's that kind of performance material. Then there's the material that we filmed, which the most important to me was these scenes that we kind of worked out of Meredith just going about her daily rituals in her loft, drinking coffee, eating breakfast, sitting at her piano and working, meditating, doing qigong, watering her plants. And that I really have to thank my editor, Sabina Krahenbuhl, because when I started working with her, I had only shot a few of those. And she kind of really encouraged me to go back, do another day, more scenes like that, with the idea that when we did the final editing, these scenes would become this kind of thing that you return to in the present moment. They were very meditative, very intimate, and an interesting kind of balance with all this other frenetic material. So to answer your question, there are all these different kinds of archival material. There's the material that we filmed. There were interviews, obviously, although we did not want to, have talking heads throughout. We kind of used them very targeted, very judiciously. And then we used little signals, like one thing, for example, for all of the films that were Meredith's films, we put them in a kind of, it looked like a projected 4x3 image with a little bit of, schmutz, we call it.
Exactly.
Just to kind of give you the feeling, okay, you're watching a 16 millimeter film that would have been done in that era. And then also to separate it, we filmed the loft scenes in this very wide ratio, so that material is letterboxed. So again, it puts you in a different space when you're looking at those things. So we paid a lot of attention to the aspect ratios and actually leaned into that rather than trying to neutralize.
Let's return just briefly to these segments in the film that you also pointed out now, these moments of everyday life. I found the camera work very striking there, because these are very intimate moments, of course. Yeah, one might say it's like very mundane, but very often somehow some sort of true spirit emerges in the mundane.
Yeah.
And I was very curious to hear how did you approach particularly these segments in the film.
Well, it was very fun because I had just at that time I was, I guess I read a list on The Guardian of like, The Guardian had decided the greatest film of all time is Jeanne Dielman, it's an address in Bruxelles, by the filmmaker Chantal Akerman.
Yeah.
And I said, I have to watch this. So I watched that film, and then I watched another film of hers. And of course, if you know her work, she does exactly that. She puts the camera in one place and has her actress or performer doing the most simple things, like in Jeanne Dielman, that film. You'll spend 4 minutes watching her do her dishes. You're behind her even, you don't even see her face.
Yeah.
And it's mesmerizing, it's gripping, and it actually can be very, very poignant. So that was I was under the influence of those films, and I talked to my cinematographer, Jeff Hutchins, and said, let's do some of these things. And I also loved the treatment of sound in her films. They're very, the sound is very close, and you really hear it, so that even though the shot is kind of very formal and locked off, and from a distance, the sound is almost like you're inside the person's head experiencing it. So I had my sound recordist, make sure that he got very close recordings of like the tea kettle whistling and the everything else. So that went into it. It was a great experience. And also the DP, the cinematographer, who was like so into it, because how often does a documentary cinematographer get to do that kind of thing? And he had a still photography background, so he just loved composing those shots, and it was really fun.
Yeah, it definitely worked very nicely in the film. Let's talk a bit about some of the thematic elements in the film. Meredith didn't quite had it easy in the beginning of her career, starting off in the 70s. There was a lot of misunderstanding or no understanding regarding her work, and of course it also is a time that is still very much male dominated in the field of arts as well. Can you shed a bit more light on these early struggles, and what do you think was the key for Meredith to push through there and then establish herself as the artist that we know?
Yes. So, back then, the 60s and 70s, you have to first of all remember that was a time where the critics had extraordinary amount of power. The New York Times in particular, a bad review, nobody's going to come, it'll close your show down, So it's really, the stakes were quite high. And the so-called uptown newspapers, as I would call them, the Daily News, the New York Times, the Post, they, as you said, they were sort of very established male critics who had very narrow ideas of what is an opera, what is theater, what does a composer do, and Meredith broke all of those boundaries, and they just didn't get it, and they wrote some of the most vicious. Some of it was just blatantly sexist kind of writing.
Right.
They, if you saw the film, one of them famously wrote, "She's earnestly strange in her talented little girl way." All these kind of patronizing, condescending kind of stuff, or worse, a disgrace to the name of dancing, or this isn't an opera. What, so she really had to endure that, and I know it hurt her. I mean, honestly, I think it hurt her to see some of that on the screen. I did, try to prepare her, but to me, that is an essential characteristic. I mean, her single-mindedness, the idea that she had this vision and this idea of what kind of art she wanted to make, what kind of music she wanted to make, and she just kept going, you know, and that takes an amazing strength of character, amazing kind of resilience, and so that's, you know, that's an important part of the film and what made me want to make the film.
What was very touching to see that ties in with this is when she talks about this kind of resilience and this determination of walking her own path in comparison to how her mother performed as an artist. And I'm sure that it was not easy to open up about that and to lay it bare on the film. But can you tell us a bit more about this this interesting contrast between the fate and the way of working between mother and daughter?
Yes, yes. So Meredith came from a very musical family, but her mother in particular was discovered at the age of 16 and began singing, you know, at that time, this would have been in the, I guess, late 40s, early 50s, commercial radio in the United States, where you would be, in New York, this whole scene was in New York, and you would be singing on these radio shows that might be sponsored by Camel cigarettes or, you know, something like that. And these young women singers would do new songs to introduce, you know, sing a new ballad with a band. Also, her mother did radio jingles, so she did like these like little jingles that were on the radio to advertise a product, like Muriel cigars or Blue Bonnet margarine or these kinds of things. It had, or Does, she said she remembers hearing her mother sing the Does soap commercial. D-U-Z does everything. And I really connected, I think, you know, probably at a very deep level, one of the things that really I feel a connection with Meredith is that my mother was also a radio singer at right around the same time. They probably ran into each other or something. But it does, you know, I don't want to get too deep into that, but I think to your point, her mother, she watched her mother, you know, have this career in commercial radio and then sort of get cast aside by the producers. She got to a certain age, or the next new fresh talent comes in and you're done, we're not interested in your voice anymore, somebody else is going to take over this thing. And she saw her mother just like become very, you know, upset and depressed because her career just, she went from this like everything fell in her lap to now nobody's calling anymore. And I think that really had an effect on her where she said, that's not for me, you know, I'm gonna make my own way. You know, it might take a lot more effort to get the money to do what I want to do, but I'm going to do it that way because ultimately that's the only way that I can be in control of my own destiny, my own work.
Yeah, and I think it was also just very interesting to hear there when she says that, yeah, like this opportunity kind of fell in the lap of her mother, and she didn't really have to fight for it, which is, of course, the complete opposite for her.
Exactly.
And yeah, and then I really kept on wondering that, yeah, this kind of resilience and this kind of pushing and fighting somehow underscores this entire body of work of hers. What is your take on that, or how do you see that?
You mean that you hear it in the music somehow?
Yeah.
I think that's true. I mean, some of these pieces, they have a kind of, I mean, there's a lot of, there's fight, there's tension that you feel in the music, but there's such a wide range of emotion in it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, then other pieces like when I heard "Do You Be" for the first time, which is this unbelievable. There's sort of, it's almost like a cry to heaven or something, a wailing kind of sound, which is the one I thought, okay, that I want to save that for the very end. but yeah, I think you hear so much. But I agree with you. You do hear the fight. You hear the fight in a lot of her music. Yeah.
Yeah, that was just interesting to
Yeah.
to see and hear.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think would be interesting to address is kind of this queer sensibility that is very much part of her work, and it also comes through the film as well, that you made, and it also is thematized at parts. How do you see it? What is your take on it? Where does this sensibility emerge from?
I feel that when I think about Meredith, I think about someone whose whole career and whose whole life has been about essentially rejecting the conventional ideas of what is acceptable.
Yeah.
And in favor of anything you can imagine, and anything you want to express is what you should express. Yeah. And she, I think that's true of breaking the boundaries of what is defined as opera or music, but also what does society define as acceptable gender identity, and we address that in the film with I think the emotional core of the film are two chapters about the two loves of her life. One was a man, one was a woman. The man was Ping Chong, the director. Yeah. Woman was Mika von Hook, who is a dancer who became a therapist. And yes, I mean, I think that's especially now, when there's so much horrible, threatening things going on, like towards LGBTQ people in the U.S. now and all over the world. It's kind of inspiring to see somebody like Meredith who's always like fighting for that kind of freedom of expression and pushing the bounds of what everybody else says is acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah. In that way, it's also, one could say, like a queer form of art making. This kind of defying expectations and the heteronormative rule book of creation and what is an opera and what is this and that. So yeah, I agree with that, and I see that very much in it, and I think in some ways that also then probably inevitably translates into the film as well, and how the film is constructed with the structuring that we already mentioned, which then of course creates a whole different temporal element to these things, that it's not chronological, it's more based on emotions and based on feeling and what kind of feeling a certain piece of work evokes, and to organize material through that and kind of pull the audience on an, maybe for a lot of people, on an uncharted path, is in itself, it brings this queer sensibility over to this work as well.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel that, I feel that in some ways I was able to channel Meredith's approach, which is rejecting what is what are the limits of what you can do in film the same way as music, and I think that's true.
I mean, we see in the film as well with how many people found her work really inspiring, and how many people took inspiration from that and incorporated elements into their own body of work. What is your opinion after making this film and after spending so much time with Meredith and being so close? What do you think? How is her work going to live on and keep on evolving through the lens and practices of other artists?
I think it's already happening. As much as she wants to kind of control how her work gets
Yeah.
out in the world, it's out there in so many ways. I mean, a lot of this was something we discovered while making the film, just going on the internet and seeing like all these kind of tribute videos, and somebody who's in Central Park who's like trying one of Meredith's songs, and then also in the kind of pop culture realm, in the most unexpected places. You know, The Big Lebowski by the Coen Brothers uses a piece of her music. DJ Shadow, a hip hop artist, famously took sampled Dolman music and did something. Bjork, you know, Bjork has actually done one of her Meredith compositions. Exactly. I mean, some of the weirdest stuff, like the Canadian synchronized swimming team in the 2000 Olympics, did her whole routine to her music, and yeah, so it's just
super cool.
Yeah, so it's all, you know. That's why it's a bit funny when Meredith is being so careful about how it goes out, because it's already the horse is out of the barn, so to speak. You know, it's just
Yeah. I mean, once a piece is born, it kind of lives its own life.
Yeah,
isn't it?
exactly.
The case.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much
Thank you.
For being here with us. I wish you a whole lot of fun at the Berlinale.
Thank you.
Enjoy the festival.
I'm already loving it. It's great.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.